Okay, thank you so much, Pat, and welcome to you all. We're so excited to see so many of you participating from, well, I can see across the globe at this webinar, which is about exploring the meanings and practices of cultural sensitivity in tourism. So the webinar is based on research and activities throughout now 2.5 years in the ARCTISEN project, which is about cultural sensitive tourism in the Arctic, funded by Northern Periphery Arctic program. My name is Karina Wren. I'm from Aalborg University in Copenhagen, and also the head of AU Arctic, the Arctic platform of my university. As a researcher, I work with tourism and cultural innovation, and I've been working with cases in Greenland and across the Arctic. In the ARCTISEN project, I've been in charge of organizing a benchmarking trip that we made to Greenland in 2019, and also with digital capacity building, so that we've been developing with the partners in this project an online course for tourism entrepreneurs and students. And of course, also this webinar is a part of that. So starting a conversation around cultural sensitivity in the Arctic, but also across the tourism landscape in general. So welcome again, and I'd like to give the word in the beginning to our two co-hosts groups, which is ARCTISEN and first of all also Atlas. So Tara, Duncan, I'd like you, if you could say a few words about Atlas to begin with. Thank you.
Hi, and thank you very much. Thanks to the organizers. This is a really interesting event and I'm looking forward to joining in. My name's Tara Duncan. I'm a professor in tourism studies at Dalarna University in Sweden. We're based about 3 hours north of Stockholm. I'm the chair of Atlas. Atlas is the Association for Tourism and Leisure Education and Research. We're an organization that's been going for 30 years this year. It's our 30th anniversary. And we are basically a platform for collaboration, for networking, and for interacting between industry, academics, researchers, and students. We have chapters in Oceania, Asia, Latin America, Africa, and of course Europe and the Middle East. We have a number of special interest groups ranging from visual methods in tourism, climate change, cultural tourism, event tourism, gastronomy and tourism, dark tourism. So a number of specialist groups within. We're really excited to be able to co-host this event, and this is something we want to try and do more of because we see the links between our members and all of these other interests. So really looking forward to it. Thanks to everybody, and looking forward to a really great webinar. I'm going to mute.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you for co-hosting this event. And now I'd like to also invite Monica Lütje, who is the PI on the ARCTISEN project, to say a few words about this project as a starter for our conversation here today. So Monica, if you could tell us a little bit more about ARCTISEN. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karina. And Randy, please. Will you share my slides? So my name is Monica Lütje and I'm from University of Lapland in Rovaniemi, Finland, and the responsible leader of the ARCTISEN project. Just a few words about the project. So we have started in 2018 and the project will go on until autumn this year. And please, Brandy, show the next slide. There in the next slide, you see all the logos of the participants. So we have universities from Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Canada, and then also Denmark, where Karina is. And then we have also IT Museum from Sweden and Northern Norway Tourist Board from Norway as a partner, and then also WINTA, World Indigenous Tourism Alliance, which has just moved its headquarters from New Zealand to Australia. And then in the next slide, you see our associated partners, and they are small and medium-sized tourism companies in these countries, and also some other organizations, mainly NGOs, but also the Sami Parliament in Finland. And in addition to the logos you see in the slide, we have also 10 small Sami tourism companies in Norway that are our associated partners. So quite a big group. And our main target group in the project is small and medium-sized tourism companies, but also others like NGOs and public sector stakeholders, and all who are connected to tourism development in the Arctic region. And our main purpose of the project is to improve entrepreneurial business environment for culturally sensitive tourism startups and SMEs. And the activities we are doing, the first one is to build understanding of culturally sensitive tourism business environment. Cultural sensitivity is a new concept in tourism development and research also. So we have been doing desk studies, interviews, and published baseline reports and academic articles, and also blog posts a lot about the topic, cultural sensitivity. And then what Karina already explained, we have been enhancing skills or capacities. We have created this online course, which is open access and free for everyone. We are creating a digital toolkit for culturally sensitive tourism development, and we are organizing webinars, of which this one is the first one now, and on an international level. And then we are trying to build a cluster, a culturally sensitive tourism business cluster. And for that purpose, we try to network, which is of course a little bit difficult now because of, or not the same thing as without the pandemic. We had the benchmarking trip to Greenland, and this week on Monday, we had the first online benchmarking trip to Norway. Next, we will have an online benchmarking trip to Finland, and then Sweden and Canada also. Then we are doing product development together, and we have created a roadmap to culturally sensitive tourism, which has been published on our website. And then we try to communicate as much as possible in all possible ways. We have been attending a lot, all kinds of conferences, seminars, workshops, and other events, organized events ourselves. We have a quite lively Facebook account and other social media accounts. We have our website, we have a blog, and also personal communication is very important in our project. And if you want to have more information, then you can please visit our website, and from there you have links to everything we have been creating so far. And I hope you will enjoy this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica, for giving people here a little bit of background information into the activities of the ARCTISEN project so far. So now I'd like for us to welcome Arvid Viken, Emily Höckert, and Brian Grimwood, who will be talking about the concept of cultural sensitivity in their presentation, engaging with different cultural sensitivity in tourism. So please, if you would like to share your presentation, thank you. Meanwhile, I was just going to post in the chat a link to the online course that Monica was talking about, learnculturaltourism.com. So if you are or know of entrepreneurs in tourism or students that might be interested in the course, you can access it, or can see there's not a hyperlink, but you can see the link to the online course here. And we're also just 1 minute ahead of time, so we will give.
We have time.
1 minute. to get the presenters ready.
Yeah, my name is Brian Grimwood. I'm an associate professor at the University of Waterloo in Canada. The University of Waterloo is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Attawadrons people, and is situated on the Haldeman Tract, which is lands promised to the Six Nations of the Grand River.
Yes, great. And I could present myself. My name is Emily Höcket, and I work as a researcher at the University of Lapland in Finland. And I work with ARCTISEN project.
And I'm Arvid Viken, working at the University in Tromsø, the Norwegian Arctic University.
So we have 10 to 15 minutes in this presentation. What we want to do today is share some work that we've recently had some good news on. We had a news from the Annals of Tourism Research yesterday that the paper has been accepted for publication, so we're excited about that. And it's work that's based on the ARCTISEN project in our collaborations with that group. So it's a conceptual paper informed and enriched by the collective efforts, partnerships, and learning among Arctic tourism entrepreneurs, agencies, academics, including various First Nations, Inuit, and Sami peoples, as well as collaborations with the World Indigenous Tourism Alliance. So our presentation today is meant to offer a brief overview of the conceptual framing of cultural sensitivity in tourism that we developed through this paper. Ultimately, the task is to introduce the group today, the 100 or so folks in the audience, to how we've been thinking about cultural sensitivity as a way of enhancing understandings, addressing contemporary challenges, and opening up new possibilities for tourism. So I'll hand things over to Arvid, and Pat, if you can flip to the next slide.
Okay, thank you. This project basically started in 2016, I think, when we did an application for this Northern Periphery program on something called sustainable tourism, but we didn't come through. And then we had to do a restart and try, and actually we probably came up with a little bit more catchy concept like sensitive tourism. Catchy, but maybe because nobody really knew what it was about. But anyhow, we got money for that and started the process. As it probably was said, it is a collaboration between many universities. And then somehow I started together with Emily and Brian on this conceptual paper. And as I almost do when there is a concept I don't know, I start searching around to find out what is said about this concept. And so we did. And but we should say that at the same time, we also started to talk to people. And actually, it was quite interesting to see how this concept engaged people, although we said we didn't know what it meant and they didn't quite know what it meant. We got very good discussion around it. And yeah, and our work on the conceptual side, we observed that this was a term that was used in several areas, but it was basically about cross-cultural communication in one way or another. It was used in social work, in communication studies, in teaching, and so on. And we found one example in tourism related to ecotourism of a guy called Donahoe. And we also then came across a work done by one guy called Milton Bennett, who had created a model for stages in development of cultural sensitivity, stretching from ethnocentric to ethno-relative approaches or performances. So that somehow became quite central to what we did after that. So, Emily, will you continue?
Yes. So what we have tried to do in our paper is to describe sensitivity as a certain kind of orientation toward others and otherness and difference, and kind of and an orientation to the dynamic nature of cultures. So, and just to make clear, we do not approach sensitivity as something being vulnerable or fragile, but we see it as a subjective orientation toward others that is based on recognition, respect, and openness. And our approach, or where we kind of our discussion started, that they were inspired especially by Emmanuel Levinas' relational ethics. And well, Levinas can also be seen as a post-colonial thinker in a way that he criticizes all kind of categorization of the other and all kind of intentions to essentialize the other, to claim that we know the other or that we know otherness. And what he says that instead we should strive for openness. So what we've done, and to be more clear, what we mean, just to try to describe shortly what we mean by insensitive and sensitive orientations, that we have built on this phenomenologically informed model by Milton Bennett, the one that Arvid just mentioned, and his theory of intercultural sensitivity. And what he says that it's not only about skills and knowledge, but he underlines the importance of self-reflectivity, that we reflect our pre-assumptions, cultural norms, and values. And well, it's been seen here as an orientation that simultaneously shapes and is shaped by different kind of narratives and encounters. So it's interesting to think how different kind of tourism products and services can shape this orientation. So it's not only a prerequisite that we should be sensitive beforehand, but there's also the possibility that comes with tourism encounters. So here's our, we have tried to put it into this model to be more clear what we're actually trying to say, and also ourselves try to understand what we're trying to say. So we have found this Bennett's model fruitful, especially as it illuminates the differences between ethnocentric and ethno-relative orientations toward otherness. And we have, at the same time, we have developed it further. It's not that there are many things which we can read from our paper that it's not that we have just taken his model. We saw that it was necessary to adjust it to adjust it to tourism context. So we have tested to illustrate our conceptual framework with these two circles. And so on the left circle, on the left side here, that presents culturally insensitive, these ethnocentric orientations, which were there in Arvid's slide, appropriation, assimilation, and stereotyping. And well, this orientation could also be described as this insensitive, self-centered way of being that creates these categories between me and you, us and them, and so on. And then the right circle presents an ethno-relative realm, in other words, a relational orientation that strives for openness and recognizing and respecting otherness and multiple others, and the dynamic nature of cultures. So what do you think it's here is interesting? We don't see it as there will be like stages of becoming more sensitive, but we see it's situational, and it's interesting what happens in tourism encounters and how this kind of respect, recognition, and reciprocity among different kind of actors can be enhanced within tourism. And it's clear that you can, we have now here these 3 R's. You're welcome to suggest new ones, but the most important is that they still have to start with R, because this is our R model. It's a little bit of self-irony there, but you can think of other relational concepts that could also fit here. And then can we have the next slide, please? We would like to just provide a few examples what we think that this culturally sensitive orientation would mean in practice. And we have the example here from the policy context, the Larrakia Declaration from 2012 that promotes the rights of indigenous communities in tourism development, which underlines the importance of respect for customary law and lore, land and water, traditional knowledge, traditional cultural expressions, and cultural heritage. And we have a quote here from the late Johnny Edmonds, who worked so actively with WINTA, with the World Indigenous Tourism Alliance, and was also a key contributor to developing the ARCTISEN project. And what Johnny said is that he saw that cultural sensitivity is about respect, that it boils down to respect. Give word to Arvid now.
Okay, it's probably the next.
Take the next, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, these slides show the Sami costume and the Sami star hat. And this could be used as an illustration of both recognition and respect, actually. What is the major point is that there are so many symbols and meanings into these objects that you should be aware of when you are using it, creating it, selling it, if you should do that. For instance, the costume will say something about age, about marital status, the place you come from, family, and so on. So there are lots of things to read out of this, which means you have to recognize these aspects to handle it in a sensitive way. That is part of our way we are looking at. Then there is a question, of course, who can wear these things, who can make them, how can they be produced. Another side of it is that the costume is some sort of a fashion clothing, and which also raises question, how far can you go with the colors and shapes and everything. And then, of course, can it be used in a tourism context, and in how? And we have that situation that it is very often used in the costume is used in as some sort of a uniform for people in the tourism business, and more in Norway and Finland, I think, than in Sweden. Then the question is, can everybody dealing with tourism in this region wear this costume, or should it only be Sami people? And of course, there are not always very straightforward answer to these questions, but the point is more that you should pose this question and be aware of it as you are when you are part of this tourism context. Concerning the hat, it is more used in tourism because it's actually a souvenir, and the people are buying it here in Tromsø, and then they are putting it on and walking around in the streets. And this is also discussed, if this is something we should defend or should we not, actually. Some think it's disrespectful even to sell this hat. But we in this project have interviewed one of those selling it, and then he felt the dilemma, but had chosen to sell it. As he said, it was a good business because it is sold. So there are lots of dilemmas, lots of questions to be raised related to sensitivity as such when we deal with the Sami tourism up north. Okay, Emily.
Yeah, next slide, Pat, please.
And you're also coming close to the conclusions before some questions.
It's just me, Karina. So I'm the last one to speak here. So I'll try to be as efficient as possible. This slide here is meant to highlight that cultural sensitivity operates in and through tourism research as well. And so we're highlighting a project here that I was involved with. A couple of graduate students here at the University of Waterloo, Alison Holmes and Lauren King, as well as the Lutsoke Dene First Nation up in the Northwest Territories. So the citation of the paper is there, but the point here is to emphasize that cultural sensitivity, as sort of we conceptualize it in, as Arvid, Emily, and I conceptualize it in the paper, runs through the substance and the process of doing tourism research, and that's highlighted, or it can run through the substance and process of doing tourism research, and that's highlighted in this paper with the Lutsoke Dene First Nation. And then next slide, Pat. And so I offer that paper with the Lutsoke Dene First Nation as a teaser or something to sink your teeth into if you'd like to read more on some of this before the paper with Emily, Arvid, and I comes out. But as we've been working through this conceptualization of cultural sensitivity, we found it really challenging, if not impossible, to pinpoint any sort of concrete definition of what cultural sensitivity is. Both culture and sensitivity are dynamic, contested, and relational concepts. And so what's become clear to us is that, you know, that this call for cultural sensitivity is not limited to Indigenous and non-Indigenous relationships between Indigenous, non-Indigenous peoples, or it's not specific to Arctic places, but it's something that has some relevance more broadly within different contexts of different language contexts, different rights, political organizations, influences, economic conditions, and worldviews. And so our goal with this paper really hasn't been to nail down any sense of what cultural sensitivity is, but to write into the tensions around cultural sensitivity, provide some conceptual framings for people to think through and to discuss and critique. And we hope people will take us up on that task. So thanks so much. I believe we've got 2 minutes left for questions.
You do. So if we have someone either from the audience, there's a question here from Deborah Insenbacher. Would you like to pose the question yourself, Deborah?
Sure. Thank you very much for those very insightful comments, and congratulations on your paper being accepted in the Annals of Tourism Research, which is a premier journal in tourism studies. So thank you for your model. I think as a community, we can build to improve it. And I want to know about the important word R for responsibility. So your example of the headwear for the Sami people, we can ask this question in relation to the selling of cultural clothing worldwide, not just in the Arctic, but if we say who's responsible to maintain the cultural sensitivity in this case, is it the seller or the buyer? Is it both? So I just want to put forward the word responsibility in your model. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. Responsibility is a term that both Emily and I hold dear and have written about. And Emily, I don't know, can you recall the conversations we had around where responsibility fit? Drawing on Levinas, I think we opted to go with reciprocity as an alternative term that had some resonance with Levinas.
I could think that the responsibilities. I don't know if we should have it as, we didn't know how to make it with PowerPoint to put it there. No, I'm just kidding. I think responsibility is all over there. I think it would be the responsibility and the responsiveness and the ability to respond. That's a very good point. And I think that would be, it's part of the sensitive orientation is the the idea of responsibility. But then if you ask about actors, like whose responsibility it is, that is very good. I'd say that that everybody can have their responsibilities in this. I know, Arvid, what would you say?
I agree, and that is probably also part of our message here, that it is different sides in all these relations, and all have some sort of responsibility, to use that term. And then I probably should say that, well, in the next version of the article, the paper, we will include the responsibility aspects.
Thank you. Also, Lenya Marquez, from what I would like to call our sister project called Sensitizing Youth, Young Travelers for Local Cultures, has also asked this question, which we will not have time for right now to answer, but which I think we should carry in the back of our mind throughout the webinar, is how we should consider the next steps in terms of developing and strengthening the concept of cultural sensitivity further. Maybe we can come back to that, Lenya. So thank you very much for that question as well. But now I'd like for you to please welcome Chris Hurst and Harvey Lemlin, who will be giving a presentation exploring cultural sensitivity and Indigenous interpretation in Arctic Canada. So Chris and Harvey, if you could share your screen. Oh, that was so smooth. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah, I'm here. For the intros are with Chris. So I'm Harvey Lemlin. I'm in Thunder Bay on the treaty lands of the Robinson Superior Treaty, Fort William First Nation, the homelands, and also the homeland of the Métis Nation. Chris will be speaking first, and then I'll come back, and then we'll follow up with some final reflections and then a review. Chris?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Chris Hurst. Brian's already done the land acknowledgement for the University of Waterloo, but I'm a PhD candidate there. So yes, our presentation today is about exploring cultural sensitivity and Indigenous interpretation in Arctic Canada. One of the things that we've done is take those conceptualizations that Brian was talking about in the last presentation. And as part of the ARCTISEN research team for Canada, we took a look at how cultural sensitivity has been conceptualized in Canadian literature. So Harvey, if you want to change slides. We did a systematic literature review, and in that we found 6 emerging themes, all of which we wrapped up into a definition. Although this is open for discussion and debate, we just wanted to put it out there as something that could be considered part of a definition for tourism or for cultural sensitivity in tourism. I'm not going to read it all out to you, but some of the things that are key coming out of it is it's a personal and professional social disposition about respectful intercultural relationships. It's recognition and respect for different worldviews. It involves ethical practices, protect cultural heritage, and promote meaningful interactions. In the Canadian context in particular, we are very concerned about challenging settler colonialism and positively contributing to cultural identity. When we did this literature review, one of the things that kind of came up around it was the fact that every kind of piece of literature that we found, or every paper, really centered around what cultural sensitivity should look like. And from that, that's where we came up with our themes. Interestingly enough, when we started to think about how that could look on the ground, this is kind of where maybe Indigenous interpretation comes in, because it is around the fact that how can we ensure that the story is being told on lands that are otherwise subject, most cases, to Indigenous erasure and have been taken from Indigenous peoples in Canada? How do we ensure that their stories are told in a way that A, promotes cultural sensitivity, and B, is able to discuss, what is important to the peoples involved and not taking it from an additional settler colonial as a lens. Harvey, you want to go to the next slide? So what we did is we took a little bit of an approach and tried to do a systematic literature review on Indigenous interpretation. And one of the things that we found, again, like cultural sensitivity, is there isn't a commonly accepted definition. And we actually found very little on the topic, using a variety of key search terms, including things such as heritage, representation, Indigenous interpretation. We looked at national parks where we know some things are being done. We looked at museums in Canada and we know some things are being done, and we weren't finding that in the literature. Another thing that we noticed is that literature that we knew that had been published on this topic matter wasn't coming up in searches. But we do know that it does occur. So this is all very surprising. Harvey, however, has been looking at Indigenous interpretation in terms of his own work. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Harvey, as to what you were finding when you were doing more literature review and hands on the ground.
All right, thank you, Chris. So, yeah, the inability of the search engines to find stuff was kind of surprising. And I know some people are probably getting animated going, well, I know I wrote an article on it. I've written several articles on it and Chris didn't find any. So please don't take this as a personal offense. I know that Suzanne Delabarre, as most people will know, but it's Delabarre, has written an article on interpretation. There have been books written by Mason on interpretation. There are brand new books written on Indigenous interpretation. So this is a serious limitation of interpretation, because now that I'm teaching it and I'm certified within interpretation, is how will interpreters find any information on Indigenous interpretation if they go looking for it? Because the search engines aren't finding it. And by the way, we did do the Google Scholar search engine, just in case people want to know that one. This is also surprising considering Canada is in an era of reconciliation. I know that this could be debated, but it's certainly the way the government feels it is. And this is a strategy that was developed by Parks Canada, and it's called Fostering a Culture of Reconciliation within Parks Canada. I won't go through the entire document. I'm just providing you with an overview, and interpretation is alluded to in this document. So it's not that Parks Canada doesn't want to do it, but it's how come it's not being applied. And here's an example of where it is being applied, because again, this is not only some of the stuff that I have researched and other people have researched, including Pat Mayer, who was involved in the Torngat research. Brian Grimwood is attached to the Dene Rangers, the Watchers of the Land, with Lutzoke. The Haida Gwaii Watchman program is an Indigenous-led interpretation program, so guiding. And of course, the Polar Bear Guides in the Torngat Mountain National Park, which I want to point out that I have already said that Pat and I wrote several articles on there, and we demonstrated that the Polar Bear Guides, who are all Inuit guides from Nunatsiavut, became the key attraction because they are the links and they contain crucial elements, as we are seeing with the Haida Gwaii Watchmen and now the Watchers of the Land in Lutzoke. There's also these phenomenal interpretation center. So Haida Gwaii Heritage Center and the Kluane National and Reserve Visitor Center and the Darku Cultural Center. And I'm only using examples that I'm aware of, and I have visited the one in Kluane. So it's not only that there's on-site interpretation, there's various definitions of interpretation, and you can ask us about it after that. We didn't want to get bogged down too much with that. But what we're trying to demonstrate here is that you both have the formal type of interpretation, face-to-face, and the informal one with these visitor centers. What we were able to find, and throughout my research on this topic, which is, I should say, is evolving and embryonic. So the terms are similar to cultural sensitivity. And by the way, I want to thank Brian and Arvid for springing that article on us, because we could have incorporated some of their latest findings, but we're just going to go with the first article that we have. So we have promoting respectful and meaningful intercultural relationships that challenge stereotypes and address settler colonialism. I know that interpretation often says you should not make your visitors uncomfortable. What Pat and I and others I've seen in Torngats is they do in a manner that is very professional, but they also challenge the dominant Canadian narrative that Canada was somehow really nice to Indigenous people and we have been good to them. Torngats does an amazing job of challenging that narrative. Protecting cultural heritage. Contributing to cultural identity. Again, if I go back to Torngats and Lutzoke, It's reminding people that this is not an issue of the past, that the people were there, are here, and will be there in the future. It's also in the Torngads, to me, a beautiful demonstration of the multiple generations and the process of healing. What was also stressed in Indigenous interpretation in some of those articles that didn't show up, but we found, offering personal connections to place and multi-sensory experiences. So walking on the land, smelling stuff. I don't know if anyone that's worked with Indigenous people, we call it in dialogical interpretation, which is a new, more qualitative approach to interpretation. We call it heart, head. So you're learning, your heart, you're feeling, hands, you're touching, and Indigenous people that, and Métis people added hunger for food. And I think that it's a great one because there's always food involved when you're working with Indigenous people. And the last one here that we found is fostering a deeper understanding of the sacredness of Indigenous landscapes and seascapes. So now we're getting into challenging worldviews. And sometimes with some for Indigenous people is saying to people, those glaciers are alive to us. Those rivers are living entities to us. So it goes way beyond just providing scientific knowledge of how the river flows. So, what's going on here? Well, we know that interpretation parks is a relatively new field, and it's largely offered and governed by agencies. What you say, who says it, when they say it. And that often doesn't work very well with Indigenous people. National parks, Canada prides itself, like the US does, on saying it's one of our greatest assets that we gave to the world, one of our greatest ideas. Well, it's true, but there's a long history of expropriation, of denial of treaty rights, and, as Chris mentioned, Indigenous erasure. And in Canada, there's still a lot of articles saying Aboriginal erasure. So where people, so you'll have that acknowledgement that Indigenous people used to be here, but they're no longer here. Well, they're no longer here because they've been expropriated from their traditional lands. Also, that search engines are currently inadequate. And that's important for people that go looking for this information. The reality, however, does mean that if people are looking for this type of information, they're not going to find it. So what we need is, Chris, I believe this is yours.
Yes. So further research is required to build upon what's there, but also ensuring that the language that we're using and conceptualizations, search terms are actually finding what we need to find. Because this literature, as Harvey said, there is a lot coming out around it. There is a robustness to what is being done. It is concerning that we're not finding it. The second is create an Indigenous interpretation website and a reference warehouse so that we can ensure that we're finding what we need to find, and doing so in a way that ensures that Indigenous interpretation is able to work in ways that are actually moving towards reconciliation, and creating a working definition of interpretation with Indigenous peoples to ensure that what we are saying and what interpretation means has meaning and is also supportive of cultural identity.
So very much inspired, as Chris was saying, from cultural sensitivity. I have a feeling that interpretation with Indigenous people is one of the evolution towards it. I think that storytelling encapsulates more what Indigenous people are talking about. But as we said, this is the first phase of a multi-phase project. Thank you.
Okay, right on time. Thank you very much, Chris and Harvey, for your presentation here. And we have 5 minutes for questions, and we might start already with a question from Deborah on another R word. So Deborah, if you would like to ask it yourself.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for that presentation. You know, this is just such a rich area for research, and I want to congratulate everybody for investigating these pathways. And I hope that by the end of today's event, we can see ways that they all connect to drive this further and get greater value from this. I was just thinking about the role of language in translation, because my international work has just led me to understand that who is doing the translating, who is doing the interpreting, who is running these spaces and exhibitions.
You're fading out a little bit, Deborah. If you could get closer to the microphone, please.
I'm on top of the microphone. I am. Is this any better?
No.
No. Sorry. Can't get any closer.
Maybe she can write it out, Karina, and we can address another question.
Yes. So who is doing the interpretation and who has the right to interpret in a given context?
Well, that's a really loaded question. I'm going to take a stab at it. Chris has more experience. I've never worked with Parks Canada. Let's just say I worked against Parks Canada, and often because I represent Indigenous communities. The narrative is owned and dictated by Parks Canada. There's a new book that came out, Authorized Discourse, and I think that encapsulated it. It is Parks Canada that does the interpretation and says what goes into the interpretation and when the interpretation is done. There's also a rigorous certification process for interpreters, which Parks Canada dictates. Chris?
And I think, yeah, I mean, I fortunately have been on the other side, having worked with Parks Canada against Harvey, I guess. No, not at all. My role was more around policy, but a lot of the conversations, especially around things like national heritage sites, around monuments, around even what happens, in parks. There's one thing that goes on kind of at the field unit level, where you will start to see that there are certain superintendents who really recognize a lot of the issues around what is being, officially the script, or what makes it onto a plaque and which languages are represented on a plaque. But at the kind of federal level, it's, and you're, sitting there in national headquarters, a lot of the conversations become around things like several parks are located on lands that have traditional territories of both First Nations and Métis, and who's at the table and whose story gets told. So they're dealing with a lot of the complexities around negotiating that, and the way that Parks Canada has taken that approach, largely from my experience, is to then determine what is allowed to be said, how it's said, and making sure that a certain script is followed.
Thank you very much. Yes, I don't know if we have more questions from the audience. I don't see any raised hands. Oh, yes, I see Matt here. Matt, would you like to ask one last question?
Thank you very much indeed. I found this absolutely fascinating, incredibly interesting. It's a completely new area for me. The question I have is much more global. I teach Arab cultural awareness, and although that is quite a way away from you, the clear difficulty I have is that people immediately create barriers when talking about sensitivity, rather than starting with similarities. And is that something that you have found as a difficulty when trying to explain to people that essentially we're the same, but our culture, our heritage, our tradition have made us beautifully diverse?
Yeah. Sorry, it's not that I'm stunned by the question. It's amazing that we have to explain that. But yes, it is part of interpretation. I think in Pat, I know Pat's not going to say anything, but I think for Canadians, it's our narrative of our history that's the most challenging. We distinguish ourselves from the US. We didn't have wars. We did have wars with First Nations. We didn't mistreat them the same way. And I think that narrative really is the most challenging, because Indigenous people will want to say, like, we are here, but your history is not as good as you think it is. And then you run into this wall with Canadians, and it gets very challenging. Ironically, from what I've seen, is Americans are more accepting of that narrative than we are. And I'm French Canadian, so I have a different narrative. So yeah, even before we can get to what you were saying, is you kind of have to deconstruct with Canadians going, you realize your history is not as accurate as you think it is.
And I think perhaps to add to that, one of the challenges we also have, I think in a lot of Canadian contexts, is because of that narrative and that history and that kind of pushing it to the side, we then have the double issue of pan-indigeneity in terms of everybody gets lumped together. So it's everybody has the same Indigenous history and the same views and the same stories. And in fact, that's not the case either. We have lots of different peoples who, categorically are grouped according to the government, according to Métis, Inuit, and First Nations, but it's a lot more complex than that, and there's a lot more peoples in that. So even to talk about the similarity is great, but we also have to recognize that because we have this history and because we do put this block up, because it does challenge our own perceptions of Canadianness, that what ends up happening is it becomes Indigenous and they're all the same too, which is also a concern when it comes to interpretation and ensuring that the stories told are specific to the peoples who are involved.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris and Harvey, for tending to this question about how we can work maybe around some affinities to bridge differences and then maybe find communalities across that. Now it's time for just a little bit of stretching. A 3-minute break. We meet again 5 past a lot of different time zones. Get some fluids, raise your hands and arms a little bit, and I will see you 5 past. Thank you very much. It seemed like 2 seconds of a break. I am very happy now to be able to welcome our partner, the World Indigenous Tourism Alliance, where we today will welcome Aurélie Debuchère. I hope I'm pronouncing this okay, Harvey, for a presentation on Indigenous Guardians, holistic and sensitive approaches as the new ethics in travel experiences. So getting some insights from the tourism industry side, if you will, but from the perspective of winter. So Aurélie, if I could please get you to unmute and share your presentation with us. Thank you so much.
So I would like to introduce the high value and incredible decisive role of Indigenous people in my own professional and personal path. And send you later after the presentation a link to a short film, which is the trailer of a web series called Guardians that I have created for my own NGO, which is called Native Immersion. And Native Immersion is aiming at educating travelers before departure to an Indigenous destination. The series offers to meet local guardians in Europe, who are herders, farm producers, healers, scientists, to explore the definition of a guardian, someone that takes care of the land, of the natural world, of local culture. And it's a perspective that was inspired by my work among Indigenous community during 15 years. And it tells how Indigenous people have supported the restoration of my own identity through the connection to my ancestors and my territory. So we send you the link later. And we will go back later to that message, but now we will explore deeper how Indigenous tourism has a key role in a post-COVID world with this central question. In these times of global consciousness about climate change, why would we still travel for leisure, and especially to Indigenous communities? So who are we targeting in terms of traveler profile in this presentation? Actually, we have two identified types of travelers: the Western travelers, people living in Western countries or with a Western lifestyle, so mainly on a capitalistic model, people who have a focus on, and with a focus on educated women who feel an attractiveness and growing attractiveness to indigenous cultures and want to live immersive and transformative experiences among communities. And other travel profile are indigenous communities themselves, because travel is not only a purpose of leisure, it's also a mean of cooperation among human communities who are facing the same destiny, crisis, a need for paradigm shift in our relationship to ourselves and the living planet. So first, let's answer the question why. Why would we travel to indigenous communities? So first is the fact that indigenous people are the world's oldest and best natural protectors. And thanks to data now, we know that 80% of the Earth's biodiversity is located on indigenous ancestral lands, according to the UN. Traditional societies have safeguarded and balanced the health of our common home during millenaries, and in a world of huge information flow, creating kind of eco-anxiety. We need to touch and see as a traveler what climate change means to indigenous communities and understand what we can do once back home to support our new indigenous friends. So this kind of experiences are raising the levels of consciousness, of compassion, and of global action. Secondly, indigenous people remind us all that human beings' original nature is to be an earth guardian. Native people are, first of all, great teachers and educators we should meet to be inspired by their close relationship to Mother Earth, the spiritual and invisible world. It's to learn again the language of the earth and understand natural and universal laws. The traveler's presence supports the safeguarding of indigenous languages that are at stake. We need to remember that every 2 weeks a native language disappears. All languages are precious and accurate. They are an accurate understanding of the subtle language of the living planet and ecosystems that are passed down from generations to generations, and that we need now to face the climate challenge. Also, indigenous people have a strong relationship to their ancestry. Honoring the elders, passing down oral and ritual traditions is what have been harmed in Western societies. We need to review and to update the software of our relationship among generations, especially towards the elders who are considered unproductive in our Western societies, according to the anthropologist Tim Ingold. Regarding the spiritual realm, indigenous people have the codes to drive us to the spiritual world in a safe and balanced manner. Humanity now is facing a spiritual crisis, causing a lot of abusive answers to our spiritual impoverishment. And the consequences are a cultural and spiritual appropriation. There are many examples that are flourishing throughout the internet, trade, and tourism. And indigenous people have the capacity to organize and create a real spiritual code of ethics to prevent abusive behaviors that we unfortunately meet in the practice of neo-shamanism. Travelers can be of great support to protect and acknowledge this cultural knowledge that is also creating job opportunities for the youth to relearn their own cultural background. This is a case that I have met when I lived a 6-year immersion in the Atikamekw community in Manoan in Quebec, in the boreal forest. Then creating new narratives. from recent or far times, we have almost all experienced the vanishing of our cultural specificities. Actually, indigenous people are the ones that have lived the most recent waves of colonization, and therefore still holding precious part of their cultures. And they are holes in the DNA of our modern cultures that call for new narratives on defining local and regional identities. And indigenous people are perfect mediators and interpreters to lead the reconciliation between ancestral and modern world visions. We actually need a conversation between ancient cosmogonies, indigenous and local innovation through artists and creative collaboration to reinvent our history, to also build new maps of the world and deconstruct the mainstream monoculture. Now the question of the how. So connected to what my colleagues shared, actually a word to indigenous operators, a kind of advice, but telling the real story is really the core of, should be the core of the strategy. Actually, contrary to what is automatically planned on a strategic level, indigenous people should not try, in my view, to fit into the mainstream storytelling standards currently on trend in the business and marketing sector. Because by doing so, we actually also participate to the stereotype building of our own culture. I have lived this connected to my own regional culture here, and we see how we also participate when we lose the stories of the land and we lose the stories of our own grandparents, ancestors, and so on. We tend to build a fantasy on our own identity and culture. And so that's why the advice would be to take attention to this, and don't forget that tourism is also a business sector, and we shouldn't forget that it's a culture that we are ready to market and to sell, and we are asked to package our cultural experience. Therefore, we tend to talk more about the activities that we offer, rather than believe in the worth of our own identity and story. And there are, in my opinion, other ways to remain authentic without betraying the sacred. It's to be ready to offer some level of intimacy. Strategically, indigenous operators should take the time to shift and focus the narrative around their own story, like their relationship to the ancestry, to the land, the living elders, and offer experiences that also connect to the out of business, because this is exactly where the traveler encounters the transformative experience that they are looking for. And your story is what makes you absolutely unique and definitively human. So the advice would be to be divergent and bring the indigenous worldview thanks to you artists. Build a strong and ethical system and prepare the travelers. So as it was previously said, to prevent cultural appropriation and spiritual abuse, indigenous operators and their community must build a strong ethical system as a shield to abusive attempt to the sacred practice, items, spaces, and beliefs. This is what we are trying to do with native immersion in offering that service as an add-on to travel agencies, is to help prepare, guide, and follow the traveler before, during, and after the immersive experience among indigenous communities, to participate to the respect of indigenous rights, intellectual and spiritual property, with the preparation of indigenous educators. A remarkable example that I have lived myself is when entering Aotearoa, New Zealand. the Maori people straight away talk to the visitors with Maori word. So they immediately teach you the word vision and prepare you to shift your mind and spirit to Aotearoa. Then, to conclude,
yes, thank you.
It appears that we have now entered the era of the guardians, and the world is taking consciousness of the key role of Indigenous people to sustain life on Earth. This is exactly where Indigenous people can promote themselves in a humble and ethical way to offer a journey back to the roots of humanity that travelers in a quest of meaning tend to look for. And the benefits are both sides to use the tool of tourism as a transformative experience of mutual understanding, mutual healing, and cooperation. So to go further, I have prepared some links I'm going to share with you right after the question and answers, if you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aurélie, for this beautiful presentation. I'm sure there are lots of questions, but we only for now have time for just one. So if there is someone who has a question, they can indicate it in the chat, just with a Q or something, or let me know if there are any questions. Oh, there are the links. Well, it seems that there's not. So I have one for you, which I'm very curious in having your answer to, which is how do you in Winter work with some of these ideas? How can you give a specific example as to how you work with this concept of guardians in your own work?
Actually, the concept of guardians was, I used to talk with Johnny Edmonds, who was our director at Winter, and we explored together the notion of guardianship, because it came a couple of years ago as an obvious nature of Indigenous people, an obvious role that Indigenous people had in protecting lands and natural wonders that were a part of the common heritage. And now the idea was to turn this nature into something that could be taught to the travel industry. And that's why through a native immersion, we tried an attempt to create that add-on to the travel agencies and take actually the lead to prepare the travelers and the travel agencies to make sure that the experience they are selling respect Indigenous standards and respect Indigenous rights, and that we can select Indigenous educators who can prepare with us, who are, for example, myself, I'm not Indigenous, but I would say, do some cultural translation with an Indigenous educator, and together we work to prepare travelers who want to live an immersive experience in Indigenous communities. And by preparing, we did that with Western travelers who wanted to go to an immersive experience among a Maasai village. And we prepared them to know how to use their camera, how to, just get the basic respect and understand the protocols of the community before going. But the teaching is during the whole experience and even after, because when people are living a cultural shock, they also need to have a psychological support to understand how they can turn their experience connected to indigenous people into something productive once they are back home. It means that they are going to work to go to do some research on their own ancestry and get maybe more involved in protecting their own territory. And that works.
Yes, thank you so much. And now I see lots of questions popping up, but I'm sorry to say that we will not have time for them here. Maybe you can post them directly to Aurélie or to all of us in the chat. That would be great.
Sure.
Thank you. Now I'm, as I was saying before, ARCTISEN has been going on for 2.5 years, which means that we have been going on in the middle of what we're all living with now, namely the pandemic, and also the repercussions that has had for the tourism industry across the globe, but also profoundly in the Arctic. And to try to understand how within the area that is covered by ARCTISEN, how this has impacted some of the small businesses and entrepreneurs that we're working with. We were so lucky to be able to engage Elsbeth Bimbom and Randy Bruin, our very dynamic duo from the Netherlands, to explore the intricacies of this. So I'm really looking forward to sharing for you to share your presentation on what the pandemic has meant for tourism entrepreneurs in the Nordic Arctic. And Elsbeth and Renny, if you could please share your presentation. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much, Carina. Yes, so hello everyone. So as Carina already mentioned, Elsbeth and I are both assistants at the ARCTISEN project, and in the last half year we conducted interviews to explore with tourism entrepreneurs and DMOs in the Nordic Arctic to explore pandemic impacts on culturally sensitive encounters in this area. So you can follow our progress on the bar, and we will first give a little introduction and then describe the Arctic tourism landscapes and the changes they went to that we found due to COVID-19. Then we will describe the new and different encounter that took place due to these changes. And here Elsbeth will jump in. And then we will conclude on our preliminary findings. So since the pandemic, the UN World Tourism Organization states that tourism reached a level as low as 30 years ago. So as you can see, a massive drop in terms of tourism. As international travel came nearly to a full stop, local, regional, and domestic tourism actually did an impressive comeback. But then the question arises: what does this new form of tourism actually has for impact on the encounters between Arctic hosts and guests, and how to engage with differences within national borders. So first we will discuss the Arctic tourism landscapes and the changes that it went through due to COVID-19 that we found, of course. So most importantly, throughout the Arctic, it seemed that domestic visitors are much less inclined to book guided tours or cultural experiences, such as Sami experiences. So as one Norwegian tourism entrepreneur told us, the domestic tourists here are not so into guided trips. They would like to experience only small parts of the full tours, actually, the full experiences that they provided. So tourism companies were then advised to actually unpackage their tours, and for example, so that domestic tourists could choose for a reindeer meet and greet only instead of the full reindeer experience. But what do these changes actually say about the encounter and host-guest relationships? So in case of Sami tourism, several DMOs mentioned that the encounter between a Norwegian, Swede, or Finn with a Sami host could be a bit awkward. And then they advised the tourism entrepreneurs to be less explicit in representing their culture or use other ways. And even though they didn't receive many guests, the entrepreneurs shared examples of how it was easier and more personal to host domestic guests because they share the same language, common stories about, for example, national politics, but also their relationship to nature. But this sameness also led to new conversations and ways of relating to each other. For instance, one of the Sami entrepreneurs shared that domestic guests received it to be challenging when she used the word nature as cultural element and a very important part of her Sami identity. And then she described that domestic guests responded with to emphasizing their own good relationship with nature.
Yes, and then the next question is, how do these domestic encounters impact cultural exchange between the host and guest? So even though most of the respondents looked back on warm encounters, positive encounters, with the domestic guests, there was also a tendency among Sami entrepreneurs to move their cultural identity more to the background. For instance, a couple of entrepreneurs mentioned that they do not start talking about their Sami heritage themselves unless their visitors would ask them, because they don't want to be confronted with stereotypes they might have of Sami people. And another entrepreneur who offers nature retreats focused now more on mindfulness instead of Sami spirituality, as she initially did in her storytelling. So as a consequence, cultural exchange and having new dialogues with domestic guests become a matter of cultural sensitivity. Because many entrepreneurs first await or evaluate the personality, the attitude, and the openness of the domestic guests towards Sami stories. So they wonder, are these guests interested and receptive towards difference? So depending on the level of intimacy and personal connection there is between the host and guest, personal stories are shared in a safe and trusted environment. So as one entrepreneur also described, as you can see in the slide there, telling stories about his beliefs to outsiders or tourists makes him actually feel quite vulnerable because it is different. So an intimate personal relationship must be established first before cultural exchange can happen in a culturally sensitive way. So finally, when speaking of Sami tourism in a domestic context, there are new and different ways of engaging with difference that could actually go beyond self-other and same-different binaries. The pandemic impacts have opened up for new conversations where both similarities, for instance, the close connection to nature, and also differences, like the different ways of relating to nature, are explored between Sami hosts and domestic guests. Also, the way of approaching domestic visitors and disseminating Sami stories has changed in comparison to the encounter with international guests, where Sami culture usually is the core of the experience, or often is. So instead, now, domestic tourists seem to be approached on the premises of personal interaction based on culturally sensitive values of both the hosts and the guests. So considering these findings, we can actually ask many new questions like how do these tourism developments compare to destinations within the Arctic and beyond? What lessons can we draw from these experiences? And also, how will this comeback of domestic tourism develop in post-pandemic times? Yeah, so all these questions bring us to the end of our talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Brandy and Elspeth, for sharing this new research and seeing how the pandemic has, of course, created grief and big challenges, but also offering new ways to restart or begin or initiate new conversations. And I think that also ties back to some maybe questions before, like how do we work with crafting new affinities across perceived differences. So I think that is, oh, sorry, this is really interesting. Now I am going to give the word to myself as well as to Britt Kramvig. So we've been having a conversation with ourselves, if you will, within ARCTISEN project, and it's always very good to also get some views from the outside, if you will. And so I've been lucky to be able to invite Britt Kramvig, who is a professor at the Arctic University of Norway, into a conversation about the avenues or the perspectives on future research in, but also sort of in the corners and around tourism. So Britt Kramvig is from the Department of Tourism and Northern Studies at the Arctic University of Norway and has worked a lot with indigenous and Sami ways of knowing. So what's been interesting with ARCTISEN is that throughout these years now, we've been able to work across the Arctic, not working as has been the case before, sort of case-based, but to actually try to learn and to think across the Arctic. And as a part of that, we were lucky, some of us, Emily and I, to take part in this writing of an article for the Scandinavian Journal of Hospitality and Tourism to celebrate their 20th anniversary, where we took some of the insights from ARCTISEN in conversation with other researchers who have worked with Arctic culture and indigenous culture in the Nordic Arctic, and to try to look across some of the destinations there. And so what we could see looking into this was that the representations of local and indigenous cultures took on many different meanings and different shapes across the Nordic Arctic, and something we're beginning to see, I think, throughout these presentations today, that there is not one result or one conclusion coming from tourism, that tourism is entangled in many different ways with different communities and with different issues of identity and culture and so on. And we could also see, I think, very clearly from Aurélie's presentation is how tourism can work both in ways that can essentialize and stereotype local communities and indigenous cultures, but also reversely work in other situations and other contexts to actually support and strengthen these cultures and work with reactivating or reinterpreting a heritage and traditions. And what's interesting is that mirrors kind of a general view in tourism research of how tourism can both be empowering but also destructive when we look at local cultures. And so that brought us to a discussion, Britt and I, and also others, that how do we, how is the way that we research and the way that we conceptualize tourism not an innocent endeavor? How is it, in the case of the Arctic, not only a problem about identity politics, so who has ownership, who has rights, who can claim to produce or to represent culture in an authentic or in a correct way, but it's also actually a part of ontological politics. So really asking questions about what tourism is or should be in the Arctic. what are the aims for tourism? And if we look across the Arctic, we can see that in some areas, tourism is a tool for capitalistic profit. It's also in some parts a tool for regional or even national development, towards independence, towards local capacity building, but also towards healing and empowerment. So there are many different ways in which tourism plays a role. And the way that we as researchers engage ourselves into this, how we document tourism, is not just this innocent endeavor, that we are concerned, we are entangled in the way that we pose questions and research with communities, businesses, and government programs, or intergovernment programs such as the one of ARCTISEN. And so the question is, when we do engage in these kinds of research projects, and when we are asked to co-produce knowledge, what is our responsibility? So coming back to one of these R's that have been addressed today. And how can we as researchers walk into spaces of co-creation? And how can we increasingly take in indigenous ways of knowing seriously in those activities? How can we rethink our roles, our positions, and the effects of research into this? And so this is what I'd like to invite Britt to say something about, to share some of her insights from research, and also to be able to have a conversation around that.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. It's wonderful to be with you here today, and I think that what you are talking about now is really inspiring and really important. And I want to talk today from this project that I work on called UCTA, Art and Community of Friction in Sápmi, where we are focusing on Sami festivals. Okta is this wonderful Sami word that means one and many at the same time. And that goes in a sense with what we wanted to do in this project, because the project is on the one hand, it's inspired by Ivar York, that was a well-known Sami artist, and he said that the Sami dialogue always takes place gathering around the aram, gathering around the fireplace. So that has inspired the way that we work. In addition to that, we wanted to investigate if some of the Sami concepts could be used as analytical tools. So not only are the Sami language one of the languages that we as a group work with, because we have research partners from Finland, from Denmark, from Norway, and we have also the Sami Council, Christina Hatta, as a full partner in the project. So there are several in the group of researchers that speak Sami. So we could use Sami as a working language, both when we gather around the Aran, but also within our own publication, and the first publication will be out soon. We use this concept of Servedoima, that is community, because this is about communities. But Servedoima is not the community. It is this concept that Sami concept that relates to the making of a community, and how community kind of are something that are performed together. It's not there, you are making it when you kind of maybe also entering into this kind of gathering around the Aram. So what we are also trying to do is to take inspiration from, this kind of, not only do we consider sensitivity as an important concept, we also think that we need kind of to work within the boundaries of respect, responsibility that already had been mentioned, reciprocity, interrelationness, and kind of work out what this principle will mean, also in different kind of context. So what we have done is that we have arranged this public knowledge dialogue at the different festivals, which is kind of taking place in an open space where we invite some other scholars, we invite artists, but also everybody can participate because it's an open space. So we don't do kind of, we don't do one-by-one interviews or so on. We kind of trying to create ourselves this Selbstdeutma in order for all that want to engage with the kind of question that we kind of want to investigate, so they can participate. And often, like here, we are also on the program, so to speak. It means that it is an open space for everybody to enter. So in these kind of groups, these on 2 different festivals, we use this kind of event to also, in a sense, to engage with the idea that knowledge is something that we do together. Knowledge is something that become, through this kind of engagement with each other, and where we also try to make symmetry between the different knowledge holders. So we kind of regard, our member of the group from the Sami Council. She's also a co-writer, because she's she's so important for us, and she's kind of producing knowledge together with us, so are many of these other that you see here. So maybe you can shift, Karina. So I think that, in a sense, when we think about co-creation, how should we think about co-creation, Karina?
Yeah, so this is something that we've been spending some time to discuss. How are we as tourism researchers also implicated in sensitizing ourselves and sensitizing our research methods for different and other ways of knowing? And I know that we discussed, like, how is it possible to engage with these local challenges of the communities, and how do we also need to do this in an earlier stage of research? And I know you had some really good examples as to how we could do this.
Yeah, what we have learned, and you will also find a blog at the web page of the Sami Council that relate to this. The art of listening as a kind of concept, which is very important. The art of listening is kind of to have this early involvement before the research proposal are set. I'm so sorry, I have to just close it down. You can go on, Karina.
Yes. Okay. So thank you. Well, basically, you can see in this last slide some propositions as to how we can sensitize ourselves to listening, as Britt was saying, in new ways. Giving time, starting earlier, use time to learn and to embed our projects in community concerns, and engaging also in communities of local experts. So actually starting to research, to listen, to find time, and to learn together in new ways is also a way by which we can sensitize research as, I think, quite an important partner in knowing about tourism in new ways.
Yeah, and I think that you need to kind of involve the communities in a very early stage. you know, to think about also financial support as well as this kind of time frame in order to prepare the concept, you know, to have the time to kind of really embed it and to build a kind of research group, you know, not only with indigenous institutions, but also with, you know, it could be indigenous scholars or students, or, you know, kind of be able to listen also through maybe indigenous languages, if some prefer that, you know, and that has to do with respect and symmetry as a methodological and theoretical tool, I think.
Yes, and I have to say that I also agree with you, and I think that we are coming, I wouldn't say full circle, because I think that this isn't something that we get a proper view upon, but I can see that we are getting back to some of the ideas also proposed in the first presentation, some of this, the respect and listening. I don't know, I mean, now I'm kind of asking people to ask us questions, but we still have a few minutes before we finalize. So I wonder if perhaps there are others that would like either to ask questions, but also maybe to share some thoughts or to come with other comments into this. Does it resonate with where you are? I mean, you're all sitting across the globe almost. I know you'll have questions in a minute, so it's now you have to do it.
Yeah, if anybody, it seems like no question is coming up here. You know, I think what we could do is kind of to also be concerned with map and kind of learn about what is already ongoing. You know, because like in Sápmi, as in many other indigenous territories, you know, there are quite a lot of different, you know, cultural center, knowledge center, local museums that are in need of support financially, that are also in need of support when it comes to human resources. So how can your project, if you want to do a project, engage with those needs? Huh? And how can you know, and how can your research projects support what is already important for the community? And also to think about how we can kind of return the research results in a way that will be helpful for the community and maybe also help implement those results.
Camilla, I will ask you now. You won't be cheated this time.
Carina, did you address me?
Yes, I did address you. Shoot.
Sorry, yeah, I don't know if the hand function works actually, because when I press, yeah. But anyway, so thank you so much, and I really enjoyed the conversation you had. And I actually wanted to go back to the presentation by Randy and Elspeth and ask also you to reflect on what they raised, actually the kind of the difficulty in negotiating the sensitivities between, well, in Sami tourism, with the guest or visitor who is actually very close culturally to their own culture. Maybe you could call it a kind of hybrid tourist, or maybe some of those tourists are Sami themselves. So do you have any reflections on that? Thanks.
Yes, you mean us, right? Randy or me? Yes or not? Yes, okay. Yeah, I think some of the entrepreneurs, they also mentioned actually that some of the Sami tourists, for example, they also had to be sensitive towards difference within these Sami communities, because, yeah, as you also know, there are so many different ways of being Sami. Some focus on the reindeer and some have a completely different take on it. So also within Sami host-guest relationships, there's actually also difference that they have to be sensitive of.
And Britt, Camilla is also asking us to reflect on that. I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what you mean by that question, but I think that what is happening at the moment, Camilla, is that quite a few of the tourist operators that I know of are kind of rebuilding their products, you know, in order to offer them to a different market, a market that you could say would more close. I don't like the concept of hybrid, but kind of offer, and it means that they want the guests to stay longer. It means that they dig deeper into kind of different ways of knowing that, you know, they have the possibility to engage with food and engage with, you know, many different kind of practices. And of course now I'm in particular thinking about, you know, we have a mentor that is hired at our program, Elinor Utsi from Davisida, that participate in most of our projects and also take part in educating our students. And she's one of those that have been highlighted, this kind of, you know, this kind of new way that you need to kind of make your products, in a sense, culturally thicker, I would say. You know, kind of, it's more, you want the people to stay longer, and then you have to offer them kind of, in a sense, more and more intimate knowledge. And through that, you know, you also kind of maybe have to also that some are kind of rebuilt, in a sense, the company as such, in order for this to happen. Because, you know, this kind of tourism was, you know, growing so fast these last years, and in this like really expanding tourism, I think many have built products and haven't really had the time to think it through. But during the corona, you know, they have had the kind of possibility to step back and think through and maybe think again and kind of make, instead offer something that that is also maybe partly more valuable for them to offer. That has to do more with cultural competence.
Time is running now, and I believe we could continue this conversation for a long time. I appreciate how rights and respect have been discussed here, and also the sharing of real everyday stories, new narratives, also tying into what we call product innovation, and how also the art of listening is important here. So it ties into all areas of tourism research, culture in a broader sense, and how we develop the places that we live in and that we visit. So thank you so much all for listening in, for presenting your work and your thoughts, and for providing us with comments and your time. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to give the final word to Pat, and wish you all a lovely evening or morning or night, wherever you are. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Karina. So I have the last word here, and again, I will echo what Karina has said. Thank you to all our presenters. Thank you to all of you who attended. Thank you to our excellent timekeeper again. Thank you, Karina. At least as good a job as Edward did 2 weeks ago. Now what we would like to do is we will stop the recording now, and we will welcome folks to stick around.